I know that we can all agree that life in Europe is much different than it is in the States, and while in a lot of ways life for me is better here in Europe, these are 5 things I really miss about living in the US. Number 1, stores like Target and Barnes& and Nobles. I know that these are a really weird range of stores if you're American or you've been to the US and you know exactly what I'm talking about, but so much of my childhood, and honestly up until my teenage years before I left to go to university, had been made in some of those stores. And so far they haven't made it out to Europe, and honestly I'm very happy about that, but it's still something that I extremely miss. Target, for those of you who don't know, is one of those shops that has a little bit of everything, and I honestly don't know what the European equivalent of it would be. On one side, you have the pharmacy and then food. On the other side, you have clothing and kitchen appliances, home care. On another side, you have pet care, toys that you can buy for your kids. And on another side, you could have a Starbucks cafe next to school supplies. There was just a little bit of everything. And at least in the Target that I had growing up, there was a Starbucks on one end, a Pizza Hut on the other, and you could spend like a solid 3-4 hours in there. It was a whole afternoon event, and this is also one of the smaller ones I may add. Target, for whatever reason, makes up such a large part of my childhood because either whenever our parents didn't want to deal with us or if we wanted to have like a weird adventure, me and my friend would go and quite literally spend 6 hours in a bigger Target just wandering around. We would look at all the things that we could potentially buy. We would obviously be buying the candy. We would be looking through the clothes. It was like a full-on mall in a store. And of course there are different sizes, so not every single Target looks like this, but the ones that I most prominently went to were 2 stories tall and had everything in a half that you could think of. Like literally you didn't need an IKEA. You could just go to Target. And it really had such a chokehold on me from the ages of like 12 to 15 most predominantly, and I really miss it. Because yes, you have shops out here that are kind of like Target, but they're multiple shops. It's not all fit into one. And yes, of course that's good, and I'm not trying to say you should change anything, but Target is Target. You know what I mean? Like it has its own aura. Same thing honestly with Barnes& and Nobles. I was a complete and total book nerd all growing up. Anyone that knows me knows I started studying anatomy and physiology when I was 13 years old. I was so into it for whatever reason I was, and I was constantly spending my weekends in the frickin' Barnes& and Nobles studying the anatomy and physiology books. It's actually how I came to make one of my most iconic friendships. He's an 82-year-old man called Ed. This is him right here. I love him with all my heart. But I literally met this man in this Barnes& and Nobles. And again, it's a store that it kind of has its own aura. Every Barnes& and Nobles is more or less the same, but also more or less different. It's the closest equivalent of what I could call a library out here, but it wasn't a library in the sense that at least in some of the libraries that I've been to out here, and mind you, I have been to very little libraries, so please don't come at me if I don't know about a library, but the dynamics just are not the same. I could tell you about Barnes& and Nobles, and I will, and I don't know how it's going to come out on your end, but for me, what I've experienced out here in Spain, and honestly all around Europe, it just hasn't matched up to Barnes& and Nobles. So what exactly it is that again, you would have a Starbucks cafe within one of the corners, and then you would have the rest filled with books, and this is very important, comfy chairs. You did not have large tables, you did not have large desks. This wasn't a place that they encourage you to sit and study. This is a place where they enabled you to read a book or maybe have a cup of coffee, talk with people within that little cafe area. But the main point of it was to look at books, check out books, read books. At least in the Barnes& and Nobles that I had as a kid, there was an entire section just for kids where you could go and you could sit and you could read a book with your kids. They had story time on the weekends. Like it was a proper place where you felt like you could just sit and read and you didn't have to worry about anyone using it as a co-working space. And out here, at least what I found is there are either libraries that are solely for just going in, buying books and leaving, or going in and having the opportunity to work. Like I'm sure there are other places that you could go and you don't necessarily have to work, but then it's going to be a bit more social and then it's going to be a bit more loud. And at least in every Barnes& and Nobles that I had ever been to, there was always this respective air of like, we know that we're all not going to buy these books. We are just using this place for the free Wi-Fi, but while we're here, we're going to be very respectful and keep our voice at a minimum volume. And I just haven't found that out here, and I just miss it. Number 2, Wawa. And I mentioned on here previously that I used to work at a Chipotle, but what I didn't tell you was that I also used to work at a convenience store called Wawa. If you think I spoke highly of Target, this doesn't even compare. Wawa is one of those places that I genuinely think Europeans would do so well with. Like I actually think if you just opened your heart up, you could adopt it like it was a Vips. Because Wawa is like Vips' less prettier sister, but she has cooler stories. And what I mean by this is that I both loved going to Wawa as a worker and also as a customer. And I honestly can't say the same about Chipotle. I can't say the same about Dairy Queen. Those are two other places that I worked at. But for whatever reason, Wawa is just one of those places where you're always going to have some sort of time in there. And it's quite literally the perfect rest stop for any occasion. Like, I remember after long drives with friends, if we were tired, you stop at a Wawa. If you were on your morning walk to school, you stop at the Wawa. If you're on your lunch break, you stop at the Wawa. If you did a little too much or you did a little too much, you could stop at the Wawa. There was something there for everyone. And when I was working there, I really loved it because if you break the store down into three main parts, you had the coffee corner, you had the sandwich corner, and then you had the rest of the shop. And the rest of the shop was pretty much like your average convenience store. Like, they sold candy, chips, pre-made things, ice cream, drinks, you get the gist. And in the sandwich area, you could get your hoagies, you could have the most amazing mac and cheese that you've ever had in your entire existence. You could get cookies, you could get paninis. There was always specialty snacks going on. So you could specifically ask the workers to make, for example, a cheese stuffed pretzel, chicken nugget bites, buffalo bites, even a hot dog. And it was the coolest freaking thing. And then in the coffee corner, you had, of course, your coffee, but then you had the specialty hot chocolates. And at least in my Wawa, you had an ice cream machine. So there was just a little bit of everything. And hearing about it, it probably sounds like the most unhealthy place to go. But because they're always very strategic in where they're located, you're always going to have some wild customers. And in the one that I worked at, a wild story that I have in particular is I was working, it must have been about 10 p.m. at night because I would work the night shifts because I was in school. And the amount of people that came in a little too was absurd. It literally took this one couple 20 minutes to order one junior size hoagie, which by the way is less than 4 inches. It is the tiniest little thing that you can buy on the menu. And it still took them 20 minutes to order this thing because every single screen, they reacted to it like they just found the Holy Grail. They were like, for 20 freaking minutes straight. It was the perfect way that you could ever end a shift. And I just haven't found the equivalent of that out here in Spain. Because yes, of course, you can have those convenience stores that have everything that I just mentioned within their little shops next to gas stations, for example, but you don't have Wawa. You know what I mean? It was perfect. Number 3, celebrating specific holidays like Halloween and Thanksgiving. Again, this is because I was born and raised a true red-blooded American and I loved celebrating my holidays. I totally bought into capitalism and I lapped up every second of it. There was nothing better than a Friendsgiving. Do you know what I'm saying? Or going over to your friend's place for Halloween, especially when you were a little kid, and raiding the neighborhood. And I feel so bad for kids out here in Spain because you do not have that at all. Like, I've been here now for 2 Halloweens. Neither Halloween did I see kids going around, dressing up, having fun, stealing candy, being children for this specific holiday. And I know that you can say, oh, well, we don't celebrate it like you capitalistic Americans, but here's the thing. Capitalism is great, okay? Capitalism is a source of bonding, especially when you're a little kid. It didn't matter when I was in a shoebox small apartment as a kid or when we moved to a townhouse when I was in my teenage years. Every single place that we went to, there was something going on. They enabled Halloween. So for example, when I was in my apartment complex, people would put out an entire bowl of candy outside of their doors. So you could take one and then keep going. When I moved to a townhouse, in the little development that I was in, people either sat outside giving out candy or they had the bowls outside their home. And I feel like this is just such an integral part of childhood for me that it feels so weird being in a society where they don't have it because there was no more adrenaline inducing feeling of being dressed up with your friends and having a competition of who could get more candy by the end of the night. Yes, of course, you were all trick-or-treating together, but my friends and I were the kind of friends that if we saw there was an unattended bowl outside someone's house, that bowl was either getting fully dumped into our bags or being grabbed by the handfuls like feral little squirrels. Like, you want to talk about raccoons being the thief of the night? No. You should see 13-year-olds on Halloween. And that was exactly what I was, unapologetically. It was great. And I literally have a video of when I think I was 13. It was my last Halloween. And I knew that I wanted to go out with a bang. So I unloaded 13 pounds worth of candy because I allowed myself one final hoorah and just acted like a total savage in the neighborhood. And I was with my friends who did the exact freaking same. And as I got older and we couldn't exactly do the traditional trick-or-treating Halloween things because we are now 18, 19, etc., you could go to parties, you could have fun. It was still something celebrated. And out here in Spain, it's yes, they tip their hat to it, but they don't do the holiday proper justice, at least in my opinion. And that's really why I'm not talking too much about Thanksgiving, because I know that for you guys, you don't celebrate it. It's not part of your history. But for me, the second best thing next to Halloween, aside from the Super Bowl parties, was Thanksgiving, because you had Friendsgiving. This is a photo of me and my friends at one of our Friendsgivings. There was like 3 different types of potatoes, 2 different types of mac and cheeses, a big ass turkey, so many different sides. Everyone brought one thing and didn't consult with anyone beforehand, and we just had a massive potluck. And then we started dancing and having fun. And it was just this entire event. And I know historically speaking, the holiday isn't too great because it's literally just us stealing the land and then tricking people and killing them. But in present day, it is such a bonding experience. It's so great. Yes, of course, I can tell my Spanish friends, hey, today's Thanksgiving, I want to go out and have a dinner. But it's not the same because there's not the same air of like, oh, we need to do something for Thanksgiving. Like, I specifically remember having conversations with my friends about like, okay, what's the game plan? How are we doing this? What are we making? Who are we bringing? Because you couldn't not do something for Thanksgiving. And the only excuse you would ever give to someone for not doing a Friendsgiving is if they did it with their family. And even still, you would go out with your friends the following day to still celebrate it together. And I really miss this aspect of bonding. Because yes, of course, there are different forms of bonding everywhere you go. So I'm not trying to say that, oh, no one's out here bonding in Spain or no one's out here bonding in Europe because you don't have these holidays. But at least as an American, there were so few days that we could actually bond and feel like a full family that the days that we did have were so prized, and it's why I hold them so dearly. Same thing with the 4th of July. Number 4, this one's going to be a bit more controversial, so I apologize in advance, but the expectation of you being self-reliant. Every single household is different. Every single mentality around adulthood and what that looks like and means is different. But at least for me, growing up in the States, there was a certain expectation that we had, at least in my community, that when you were a certain age, you had to be self-reliant. And that age for most people was 21, if not 18. My mom let me know from a very young age that I'm going to have to provide for myself one day. I'm going to have to do all of these things by myself. And especially after my dad died, we quite literally made a game plan of like, okay, this is how you have to be an adult because one day she's gonna die and I'm gonna have to take care of myself fully. So this is what I have to do. Bop, 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 bop. And it was something that we all kind of took pride in because whether you knew you had to be self-dependent at 18 or 21, and by the way, that just means making your own money, having your own place. You're not completely cut off from your parents. I don't really feel that out here in Spain. I've lived in the Netherlands for a little while. I've seen France, I've seen Germany, I've seen other European countries. I haven't lived there long enough to know what their social expectations are, but at least out here in Spain, there are grown men that I know, men meaning 25 years old, that are still living with their parents. And I'm not judging, we listen, we don't judge, but it is very different from what I was used to. I could never fathom living with my mother. Like, even though yes, you're saving money because you don't have to pay for rent or for food, it's just one of those things where intrinsically speaking, it feels wrong. And there's nothing wrong with it if you're just going back for the holidays or you're visiting her for a little bit. Like in my case, when and if I go back to the US, I'll stay with my grandparents, and it's not like I'm moving in with them, I'm just staying with them. But it's not normal for young adults, meaning that adults in their mid to late 20s, to still be living with their parents in the US, at least in the community that I was in, because the way that it's construed on the outside point of view is that you're a failure because you haven't made enough money to be self-dependent. And I know it sounds so warped to say, but I really miss that mentality, because when you know that you have to rely only on yourself, you become a lot more like a quote-unquote adult. You start to get better with your finances, you start to get better with your time management, you start to get better with your people skills, because now, instead of being dragged to different things by mom and dad, or relying on the social dynamics of the neighborhood that you're in, you have to completely go outside your comfort zone, make your own friends, make sure you're handling your time right, make sure you're handling your finances right, make sure you're keeping your mental health in check, make sure you're keeping your physical health in check. Like, there's no one there holding you accountable. You have to do that all yourself. And I'm not trying to crap on anyone who still lives with their parents, but at least for me, in my experience, I felt like all of those skills were severely dulled when I was living with my mom. Because if I didn't do something, for example, like clean the dishes, then she wouldn't call me down at 9 p.m. She would just clean them and then go upstairs and then go to bed. Yes, in my house, we went to bed at 9 p.m. But now that I'm living outside of her home and I'm living with a friend, if I don't clean the dishes, my friend will be the first one to say, yo, over here, this, not acceptable. And then I have to do the dishes. It's these tiny little bad habits or these tiny little vices that are constantly being enabled by your parents because they love you, they want what's best for you. Some parents will just do it and then never say a word of it because they're like, oh, you're my precious little angel, you'd never do anything to hurt me. But then at the end of the day, they're literally just enabling you. And I clearly haven't lived with a Spanish family, so maybe your mom is whooping your butt and saying, hey, clean your dishes. I don't know. But as a society, as a whole, I really miss the feeling of you have to be independent, because it really helped me in a lot of ways to grow up and have self-confidence. Because when you do have to rely only on yourself and then you look back and you see all that you've been able to do, it is the most gratifying and satisfying feeling because you know that despite everything going on in your life, you still paid your rent, you still have a very respectable looking home, and you know that no matter what's going on in your life, you're going to show up for work, you're going to show up to the gym, you're going to show up to whatever the heck because you've managed your time and your finances so efficiently that you actually have adulting down. And especially as a young person who's still trying to figure out what the heck adulting means, this is everything and a half for me right now because I have this sense of self-independence of like, no, I got this. I don't need anyone. And please let me say, I'm not saying that you're not having that kind of inner dialogue as a Spanish person. I'm just saying as an American, I prefer a different mentality. You guys are all very capable. You all have potential. You living with your parents does not dull that. It just dulled it for me. And that's my opinion. And number 5, again, a bit more controversial, but people respecting personal space. While yes, there is something to be said about how you feel like everyone is part of like a big overarching family out here in Spain, I really do miss not having to be a social creature. In the US, if I just wanted to work, if I just wanted to bury my head in books, if I just wanted to bury my head in work, if I just wanted to not socialize with anyone, I could. It wasn't something that was seen as rude. It was just something that was a thing. A lot of people were like that. Whenever your social battery was drained, you didn't have to worry about, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, even if you were a socialite. There were specific scenarios in which you could be completely by yourself, no one would bother you, and that was fine. And out here in Spain, yes, of course you can do that, but for me, at least in my experience, only if you're a hermit crab, meaning that you don't leave your home. And I don't know how to describe it without sounding like I'm crapping on your culture, because I'm not. But for example, if I just want to go out to a cafe and have a coffee with myself, just read, maybe journal a bit, enjoy my own company, the amount of times that I've met random people in cafes because people would just start talking to you is absurd. And one of them is called Faraday's. Another one is called Altered, and I'm going to be using these two as the examples. In these two cafes, which by the way look like this and this, the environment is set up in a really kind of cozy way that does encourage interaction with other people. In Altered, at the bottom part of the shop, you literally have just one very long table in which you're all sharing the same benches. Like there are 2 very long benches, 1 very long table. So if there are other people there, you are kind of forced to have a bit of a social interaction with them. You can't just ignore their presence completely. That's very rude. And in Faraday's, the way that the different areas are set up, they're set up with their own individual tables for sure, but they're also set up very close to each other. Like they could have totally just had like 1 or 2 tables on the upstairs part, but they have, I think, 4 or 5. And what this does is encourage people to be close together. You can hear almost someone else's conversation and you can chime in if you want. It's like a record store, so you're also vibing to the same music, and it really is a wonderful homey atmosphere, which is why I love going there. But if you want any kind of peace and quiet, I feel like for at least me, you either are seen as very rude if you're not interacting with people, or you have to be in your home. Because for cafe culture, if people start talking to you, you can't ignore them. If you're walking on the street and someone says something to you, you can't just walk by and ignore them. That's very rude. Like the amount of times that someone has asked me for help on the streets, or the amount of times that someone has held the door open for me and then I have to have that social interaction, yes, it's lovely, 100%. I'm not saying it's not. But if you're not really in that social mood, I really miss the feeling of being in an environment where you don't have to be social. Like, yes, of course, it's very toxic to say that, and I don't know how you're interpreting it, but at least for me, I feel like I know when I'm in the right mood to socialize, and I know when I'm not in the right mood to socialize, I'm not very fun to be around. And I don't want to give anyone this bad energy of like, oh, go away, I don't like you, you shouldn't even be here, because I shouldn't even be here, you know? Like, I'm the foreigner in your country. But there's no real way you can say that without seeming very rude, and it really does dampen your day, even more so than having a social interaction that you don't want to have. I don't know how to necessarily say to someone, hey, please don't talk to me. Because you can't necessarily say that to someone who's complimenting you as you walk down the street. You can't say that to someone if you just want a quiet drink in the bar alone and someone is saying, hey, come over here, and they're being super nice and super friendly. You look very rude, and then it ruins your day even more because you know that you're being rude, even if you feel in your head you're justified. And this one I was a bit hesitant to put, so it's going to be a bonus one, but the low calorie options. I'll make this point super quick, but I've talked about this very briefly before. I really miss the low calorie options that the US had to offer. I know that they were pumped full of preservatives. I know that they were pumped full of additives. I know that they were pumped full of so many different chemicals, microplastics, and toxins. But here's the thing. I don't care. When I want something sweet, but I don't want to break the bank trying to make it all myself, or I don't want fruit, like I want something that is unhealthy, it was so nice to be able to do so and not worry about the calories with it. Because yes, of course, that sounds very eating disorder-y of me, but just for an example, if I wanted to have a sugar-free cookie, or if I wanted to have a sugar-free brownie, then I could buy specifically already made brownies that had cassava flour, for example, or that had a 0-calorie sweetener. So you were literally eating like no calories, but it still tasted fantastic. fantastic. Or you would have the calories at like a third of what they would normally be, and it was great. Like a Fiber One bar was 90 calories for a little brownie. It was a wonderful treat. There are no Fiber One brownies out here. Even a little granola bar, a sugar-free granola bar, that was 90 calories. The least amount of calories that I found in a granola bar out here has been like 130, or if you're doing like the actual healthy type, it's like 200 or 250. And yes, of course, it's always better to have the whole ingredients than the former, but there are just some times, you know what I mean? When you just want ice cream and you don't want to worry about having a 300 calorie scoop. Instead, the whole pint is 300 calories. It feels so much better, especially because we all know that when you turn on a movie, you're not going in it with the intention of, oh, I'm gonna binge, but you end up binging. You end up watching the movie, getting so absorbed with whatever's going on, and then you look down at your pint and realize, oh, I just finished the entire pint. And if you're talking about a Ben & Jerry's pint, or Magnum out here, because they're like obsessed with Magnum out here in Spain, you're talking about 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 calories for a pint of ice cream. But in the US, you have Halo Top. In the US, you have a specific kind of Breyer's ice cream where they make it for the low-calorie people. There was a cookies and cream ice cream that I would get practically every weekend when I was in 10th grade, so I was maybe around 16 at this point. 330 calories for the entire pint. It was wonderful. I could get that with my sugar-free hot cocoa. The entire meal would be 500 calories, so I could have a feast at home when I was watching movies with my friend and not worried about, oh, I just put down 1,500 calories. Awesome. But out here in Spain, you do not have that. You have whole ingredients. You have really good food. And yes, that is a great thing, and I'm not trying to crap on that, but when you just want to be unhealthy, the fact that I'm not enabled, I don't like it. It's one of the weirdest things, but I don't like it. So I don't know at this point if you have a better or worse vision of what life is like in the US, but for me, this has brought back such utter nostalgia, and I'm feeling very happy right now. So I hope you've learned a little something, and if you are from Spain or you are from Europe and you're watching this, tell me what your thoughts are. Like, I actually want to know, what are your thoughts, especially on the bonus one? Because yes, everything else I do very firmly stand by, but there is something so pleasurable about eating unhealthy food. We all know this. Do not pretend like it is not a thing. It is a thing. And not feeling guilty about it. Yes, you can work out the next day. Yes, you can put yourself on a diet. But why do that when you can have such a simpler option right in front of you, pre-made, ready to go? So thank you very much for being here, and I'll talk to you again soon.